Welcome to episode 2. Last time we talked about how a lot of people run their financial side of their business. A lot of bank balance accounting, basically do I have money in my bank? Then let's do it.
Right. And talk a lot about a lot of the wrong things. Not necessarily wrong, but not necessarily right.
The things that aren't, I would say, not advisable for long-term success.
Right.
That's
not a lot of foresight in those methods.
Yeah, right? Well, because especially if you're in a cyclical business or a business that has just natural downturns. Like I had a concrete company for a long time and we did a lot of coatings. Well, you can't coat a patio in the winter. If we're not planning, I always used to joke around that February was the death month. Literally I think the top February ever that we had was like 15 grand.
Yeah.
And this is a multi-million-dollar company.
Even in mortgage, yeah. We see in the winter, people are busy with the holidays, and we saw downturns and same thing. We had to plan for that as well. You have to plan your salary as such that those 3 months might be slow.
Yeah, in thinking about that and thinking about, okay, if we're going to start planning, where even do we start? One of the things that I love to do with my clients is I have a software called Cash Flow Story, and we can pump in people's actual numbers from their profit and loss statement and their balance sheet for a few periods, a few years, if we have that much data. And then it can tell us a story. That's why it's called the cash flow story, where the money's going, where, how much money's coming in, how much money's going out. Are we over leveraged in debt? Do we have too much debt for the company to be able to service? Okay. All these different things that you don't really think about on a day-to-day basis. There is a part of it called the 7 levers of cash.
Okay.
And it shows you on each lever of cash how if you change just 1%, how that affects not just your cash flow, but also your profitability. Because a lot of people, they say, oh, I'm profitable, but I have no money. Why? Does my P&L and my tax accountant tell me I made all this money and I am freaking broke and I don't know why? I hear this all the time.
Well, it makes sense. That doesn't align in your brain as paper says I have money, pocketbook says I don't have money.
Right? Where is my money? Show me the money. The money is, so you might have profitability, but you might have negative cash flow because maybe it's hidden in accounts receivable. So people who owe you money. Right. So if somebody owes you money, it might show as profitability, but it's still sitting in their bank account. So that's where it could be hiding.
Okay. That makes perfect sense.
Could be hiding in inventory.
Right.
It only becomes cost of goods sold when you sell it. So when it's sitting as inventory, you actually have to pay tax on it.
And it's an asset technically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. It can be hiding in debt repayment, because you get credit on your profit and loss statement as an expense for the interest, but not the principal of the debt payment.
Right.
That's the one I see probably the most is those debt repayment principal amounts, because especially if we're in construction, we have a ton of equipment that can get bloated really fast. You end up with these huge amount divides of what your profit and loss is saying you have as profit, what your bank account is saying you have.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. If the balance sheet isn't accounting for that, it's showing, hey, look, I have all this money, and that's why you're not seeing it, because that money's going out to somebody else.
And then the tax man says, hey, I want my cut of that money you don't have.
I think that's how some of us feel outside of business, right? You get, hey, look, my check says I made this much money. But then after you pay taxes and Social Security and after you pay bills, some very similar concept, just in a very much more complex way. And less easy to grasp because it's all on paper rather than happening in the real world, so to speak.
So that's why I love this software a lot too, is because we can take out and say, okay, this is the profitability and how it affects profitability, but this is how it affects cash flow. We have a cash flow issue, not a profitability issue, or vice versa, or maybe we have both. We can really look at both sides. The first lever of cash, and this is the one everybody automatically goes to, is income. But it's like a misnomer, right? Because you think to yourself, okay, if I sell more, I'll make more. But sometimes, depending on how your business is set up and how long it might take you to get paid, there are instances where I have seen negative cash flow for selling more. They increase their volume. They actually earn a worse cash position. So that means it's going to if they're already cash crunch, selling more is actually going to hurt them, not help them.
And that is way backwards from what anybody would think.
Trust me, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I have seen it. I've seen it a lot. Every single time they're like, what?
Yeah, and we've talked about this time and time again. It's not an easy concept to grasp.
Yeah.
It seems like the solution should always be more sales, right?
Yeah, it feels that way. It's like the automatic, but sometimes it's like the automatic isn't where you want to be. We can look at that and say, okay, where do we want to be? Because we don't want to grow broke and put ourselves in an even deeper hole, especially if we're in a negative cash position to begin with. Right. Then we have pricing. I love playing with price. There's so many fun things you can do. And it's not just about increasing price, it's about having a really great pricing strategy. Like, I have talked to so many people about, okay, how do you decide your price? My favorite one ever is I was talking to someone and I said, okay, how do you decide your price? And he said, oh, well, I call my friend who's kind of a competitor and I ask him how much he would charge to do this.
Okay.
And I was like, okie dokie, now I understand why you don't have any money, because that is not a pricing strategy.
I wonder how many business owners are doing that. Maybe not exactly that way, but they're just saying, all right, well, this is what this job costs. I quote out this specific type of job, and I see this is what other people are charging. I can't price more than that, otherwise I'll price myself out of the market, right? That's where our brains go. If I'm not priced the lowest, or at least in line with the lowest, then I'm going to lose. Always. I'm going to lose business. I'm going to lose market share.
But I don't think that's not always the case, right? And
Sure.
I always tell people that if price was the only, like in terms of low cost, if low cost was the only thing that mattered, then luxury brands would not exist.
Right.
Because they're not low cost. I think we need to exit that vision from our head and decide a pricing strategy based upon our own company and our own vision and our own value that we're giving to the market. Like in my concrete company, for instance, we had a coating system and the market was at like $1.25 a square foot for spray on acrylics, and we used polyurethane and we were at $3.25. And that more than double, plus that they have us remove, recolor, and then seal. So actually all in, our price was between $5.50 and $6 a square foot. So you're saying to yourself, oh my gosh, how did you ever sell this? Because it was all about the value. I said, okay, with an acrylic, you're gonna have to recoat every year, maybe 2 if you're lucky. It's gonna look gross soon. It's gonna be slippery. I gave them all the reasons acrylic sucked. And I said, okay, if you make this investment into this much more expensive product, that yes, I understand it's 4 times as much, but it's going to last 10 times as long and it's going to look great, and your liability is going to be lower because it looks shiny, but it feels like sandpaper. It's great. People were all in.
I think about a story that I heard, and I forget the book it was in, but it was talking about workers and how the cost of a cheap pair of work boots might be $50 or $30, but those things have to be replaced every 6 months if you're doing hard work on them over and over and over again. You get a solid pair of work boots that cost $400, and it'll seems like ridiculous, but it's going to last you so much longer that in the long run, it ends up saving you money. It's that same concept, and it's about getting that buy-in on, look, this is long-term value.
Yes.
And that's not for everybody. You're not going to catch every client that way, but you're going to catch the clients that want the service that you have and that is most profitable for you.
Well, and maybe you want to be that low-cost provider. Right. Maybe you want to be the $30 shoe guy, right? But you need to know ahead of time, am I the $30 shoe guy or am I the $400 shoe guy? Where are we at? We need to create our own pricing strategy based upon our own business and our own structure and our own costs. Right. So that's the next lever of cash.
I was going to say, there has to be a lead into that because you need to decide who you're serving, right?
Yes. And then you have to say, okay, so then I was reading this book and it was telling me, it was BE 2.0 by Jim Collins, great book if you haven't read it. And he was saying, if you can't control price, like you can't set the price because of your industry or market or whatever, then you need to control costs because you have to do one or the other. And I've had clients that are like, look, I signed this contract 5 years ago. My market is such that I can't do this. I have to be at this price. If we can't have really great pricing strategy, then we have to have really great cost management. So then our next lever of cash is cost of goods sold. So this is your actual materials and your labor associated with that service. So it'd be like a retail sales organization and you bought a product from a manufacturer and then you sold it. The purchase price from the manufacturer is your cost of that good that you're selling.
Right.
It's the same type of thing in the service industries. It's whatever the cost is to produce that end thing.
Okay.
If you're in plumbing, it's your plumbing materials. It's your actual technicians on the job site. Those sorts of things. Not your admin, not your marketing. That's overhead. But what is the cost of the actual production of the service? Knowing that percentage is super duper important, because especially with labor rates going crazy, with your supply costs going crazy, sometimes that you can get cost creep, and then your margin is really getting eaten into. And if you're going to sell your business at some point, one of the major things that a potential buyer looks at is the change in your gross margin over time. Are you having that cost creep? Because if you're not keeping up on your pricing with your cost of goods sold increase, it's just a recipe for failure. And we have to really pay attention to our cost of goods sold, and we have to control those costs. Then we have our overhead. Overhead is all the things that aren't direct costs. The stuff you gotta pay for, even if you have no jobs, like your rent and your insurance and all those debt payments,
right.
All that equipment you bought. Yeah, whether you have 10 jobs or 0, the bank still wants their pay. That's your overhead.
Right.
And you have to know that number. I cannot stress more. I cannot make it bigger in my mind than to say that if you do not know your overhead number and how much it costs you every single hour of every single day just to keep the lights on in your business.
That's the baseline, right? That's like the baseline. You have to make this much money to keep the business going.
Yeah. And that's how much money you have to bring in terms of cash every single month.
Right.
Before you even are able to pay a human or a worker or a supplier.
Which is why all these levers matter.
Yes.
Because all of them work together.
Yes, they all commingle to create your picture. So then once we have our overhead and we can toggle that, like, okay, can we change our marketing a little bit so that we're getting better return? Shift some of our admin overseas so that we're getting cheaper labor. There's a million different ways to play it, but just really analyzing your overhead.
Well, if you have space you're not using, that you can maybe sublease some space in your space that you're renting out to another business or another person to offset some of that cost.
There's tons of fun ways to kind of reduce your overhead and like reduce your stress level while keeping your sales high. And so just really playing with that. Then we have our accounts receivable. That's how much people owe us and how fast they're paying. So many times, I would say that especially in like commercial construction work,
right.
I see huge accounts receivable and people just being really chill about it. Like, oh, well, they'll pay us when they pay us. If you let them be in the driver's seat of when they're paying you, you're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Let's discuss, okay, so some of the options for how quickly people are paid and kind of how that makes a difference in the business and how that should be managed in such a way. And then how do you get some of those accounts to pay up when, to get that number in a more viable space?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a process and a system, right? So what gets measured gets done and gets improved.
All right, bring on the next one.
Okay, the last one is inventory, which when we're talking about blue collar a lot, service-based businesses, there's not generally a lot of inventory. There's sometimes is a lot of work in progress, especially if you are on like a monthly billing schedule. Inventory comes a lot more into like retail and those sorts of companies where you really have to manage your inventory level because you don't want to have too many days on the shelf. Like I had a client when we first started working together, they literally had 2 years worth of inventory on the shelf. So no joke, they could have not bought a thing for 2 years and continued selling at the same rate, and they would not have run out of stuff.
That seems a little excessive.
Well, yeah, because the thing is that so much, they had already paid it all off.
Right.
So every single dollar of that is held up. So then when they're telling me, oh, my P&L tells me I have all this money, where is it? I'm like, well, it's on the shelf, dude. It's on the shelf.
You gotta sell.
Yeah, like stop buying, start selling, and let's get this.
So how do you mitigate that? What do you do to, especially when you already have a surplus of inventory? Obviously, you gotta offload some of that. Are you doing sales? What are you doing to try and get some of that money back into your pocket without then going out and spending it on more inventory, which is
well, I mean, you have to balance, right? Because
Right.
I mean, especially in a retail environment, you got to keep it fresh. But some of that old stuff, just get it out. Like, sell it. This is why you see retail stores, like the big name brands, that will just slash prices, because they don't want to take it off the shelf and into storage, because that they know that's where it goes to die, and it just gets written off, and it's a total loss.
Selling for pennies on the dollar to Ross and TJ Maxx.
Or they can sometimes do that, but sometimes they just want you to, even if they have to maybe take a loss or just get their money back, they're willing to do it because it's worth it to them to not have that inventory just sitting on their shelf, and to not then have to pay taxes on that inventory and all the other things. Plus, then that frees up, even if it's just the cost of the good, that still frees that amount of money up to go buy a new good that probably will be sold at full price. Right? They recognize they're willing to not make money on that item in order to reinvest that money into an item they could make money on.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to play it, but you have to keep your inventory at a certain level. And when you get to there, it does take time, and because you have to balance it, so it's not an overnight thing. But like, we had a huge, very aggressive strategy of anything that was a certain level old. We were just like, just bottom it out, like basically give it away, like just get it out of here. Because the other thing is shelf space in a retail environment.
Sure.
And so every square foot of shelf space, if it's taken up by something no one wants to buy, that's basically wasted shelf space. So there's a lot of other nuance there, but definitely inventory management is a big thing. And then in construction, sometimes you can buy better if you buy when you don't need it, or like when nobody else is buying.
Right. So
then you can do fun inventory management that way too.
Swimsuits in the winter.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, I actually did that. We did a lot of resurfacing in my concrete company, and the resurfacer was really expensive per bag. And then my supplier was going to make the price go up a lot, and I didn't want that. And so I was like, okay, how do I keep my price low? And they're like, well, you have to buy more. I was like, okay, how much do I have to buy? They're like, well, you have to buy it a pallet at a time. I'm like, okay, I will buy it a pallet at a time. Like, and I will promise you I will buy at least one pallet a month, even in the winter. But I want a price lower than I had last year.
Negotiations on that kind of stuff is
Always
huge.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's not a lot of people that are aware that kind of negotiating is even an option. Your
suppliers are not the grocery store. They are the swap meet. You can always negotiate. Their original price they give you, I used to work for one, their original price is not a good price.
It's car shopping, right?
Yeah, tell them to do better. So I negotiated that, and literally my price was $4 a bag cheaper than the year before. Wow. When they actually were having a huge increase. Because I agreed to buy a certain amount, and I agreed to buy a certain amount throughout the winter when they were not selling that product, and so they were having issues with the manufacturer themselves, being like, hey, but they didn't want to have a whole bunch of inventory. And so I said, hey, I will help you if you help me.
And this goes back to measuring, right?
Mm-hmm.
You knew how many jobs you have in a typical year, and if I buy a pallet a month, that's going to still be enough to cover all my jobs, or it's not going to be an oversupply, a surplus of this product, and I can use that as a negotiating tool. That's so smart, and such a great tip for anybody who's looking to negotiate with suppliers. It's creative thinking like that. That's awesome. That's such an important tool.
And you need a couple things, right? You need good cash flow. You need good cash management, because I had to be able to buy it in the winter when I really had no money coming. And you need space.
Yes.
So it's all about pre-planning, right? And it's all about saying, okay, where do we want to be and how are we going to get there? And really having your cash be a tool instead of something that hampers you, something you're using in order to fuel your business and fuel building it the way you want. And the next episode, we're going to talk about, okay, now that we've figured out our 7 levers of cash and we have this great cash and profitability position, what do we do next? How do we go from having a great cash business to having wealth over time, because we're all about building wealth for the long term. This isn't about tomorrow being able to buy the fancy things. This is about legacy.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're going to talk about on the next one.
Excited for that.